As my companion and I stood on the outermost edge of the grove, we took in the sights, sounds, and smells of this hallowed and sacred glade. Priests and clerics of both Roth and of Her Majesty Genevieve moved about, guiding pilgrims or speaking to them of the history and meaning of this place. Only a few buildings stood, all grown from the ground up, via the magics of the divine guardians and tenders of this place. A lodge and eatery, a few temples, housing for the few that lived here on any sort of long-term basis, and the Hall of Honor and Memories. One of the 9 sights, where one must contemplate the 9 failures, make the 9 prayers of contrition, and attain the 9 affirmations, all to gain back a gift that was stolen generations ago. The big guy doesn't forgive easy, does he? The man beside me, nearly as tall as I was in my shortened form, spoke wryly. Looking about to make sure none were close enough to overhear, he continued. I know you've walked the path, Tag. My question is, why? The last I saw of you was after the loss of the Isle, and you still had your grace. Why would you need to have walked the path if... He didn't know. By the 9 and 4, he didn't know. Setson. That was before I was sentenced to be committed to the void. The silence in response would have been one thing, and totally natural. But Sensen went still, as if no thing or force could move him, for the long moment as he processed the statement. Even once he had, he was not sure he had heard it correctly. Or more accurately, he hoped he had not. Committed? There's only one who... He looked at me with a hard look. The Lord Protector? I could only nod. He took your... Cut, sealed, and burned away. All this time later, my wings still twitched at the memory, and a forgotten flash of pain rippled along where they had been cleaved from my back. Then how did you survive? A piece of pure voice strapped to your chest, powered by... You would have to deal with an ever-increasing amount of entropic void cascading over your body. No Analars made it for more than a week before being consumed utterly. 9 days is the official record, I spoke. Oh, so you never actually... His voice held the hope that it felt monstrous for me to crush. But the truth was the truth. No, I was, and I stayed in the pit, with that thing strapped to my chest. It was more than pain, and less than agony. By the time I was discovered and freed, the device hadn't been able to do more than superficial damage for quite some time. But how? How, Tag? His voice was soft and confused, a rarity for him. Listen, I am a master of the true fist and of the auratic arts. My auratic specialty is in regeneration. I developed it over the time I was in the pit and mastered it. I was able to combine the training of the true fist and the power it allows me to tap into to fuel my aura, and my aura fueled my healing. The restoration of my mass lost to the Voidessa and the void energies it released. To be fair, I don't know how I managed it beyond the mechanics I used. From my perspective, I was lost in deep meditation and focus, trying to hold back the destruction and sublimation of my body. I had no time to track... well, time. But before you ask, the best guess is somewhere between 9 and 10. Centuries. His voice was soft, and his look was that of horror as he knew my answer. Millennia, on the low end. I took a slow breath before continuing, trying to shift the topic. I come to these places and walk the path to remember why it is I endured all that. My people are meant to be the paragons and sage guides of the realms, and these places are a testament to that purpose. To walk the path allows me to be in touch with that greater purpose. He looked to the center of the glade, to the great tree of Roth, towering hundreds of feet beyond even the tall canopy of the wider forest. Tag, why do I feel that there should be some great building or such where that tree is? Very impressive, Setson. Only a few have the senses needed to perceive the echo of what was once there. It was the Arcanum Archive of the Dokwa, renamed the Temple of Ro after the first defeat of Vanson by the heroes. He nodded for me to continue. It's where most, if not all, the major battles with Vanson took place, as the gate used to originally summon him and then to bind and seal him was all part of this structure's design and apparently its very purpose. At some point after the beginning of the Age of Valor, it was removed by the V's, and the healing of the swamps began. By the end of the Age of Valor, Roth had implanted himself in the crater and becoming what we see here. His calm and pure nature of, well, nature, along with the efforts of Her Majesty's divine servants, are what turned this place back into the great woods we once knew it as, instead of the shifting and chaos-ridden swamp it had become by the influence of the daemon. Welcome one and all back to the library, where in today's entry we will be looking at the site of many of the greatest battles in the Age of Valor, and the ways that the V's have made it into a monument to the strength of the realms and of those who rise in its defense. This place is known as Roth's Grove. As you may well know, this is going to be just an introduction and overview of this storied and sacred place, my perceptive patrons. Further entries expounding upon individual stories will be coming in future. That said, allow us to first acknowledge that the place known as Roth's Grove is in fact where the legendary Temple of Ro once stood. And while that place is still in existence and will receive an entry of its own in future, it is not overly relevant to the groves as we know them today. In the realms of current times, the grove is a center of worship, not only for those who venerate Roth, but for those who worship nature or the natural world, those who seek healing and respite from the healers there, or of redemption, as the grove is one of the 9 sites on the path of redemption that any ground-bound or ungraced Analar must walk to attain or regain that gift of ancient providence. Ground zero for the efforts to heal the land after the removal of the temple, the grove was a center of massive acts of geomancy and purification. Her Majesty poured enormous efforts, as did many of the V's, in an effort to stop the shifting swamps and to return the land to at last what it had been. Now, healed and fully stable, the forest serves as a massive monument to the power of the realms to overcome and recover, with the grove serving as its centerpiece. Masters of all things plants, healing, or nature gather from around the realms to learn from those that took part in the Great Mending. Others learn of the history of this place during their visits and of the early years of the V, as so many of their stories ended up culminating in this place. For the Valors, Voids, Victors, and Vanquishers all did battle with Vanson within the temple. Each time they struck him down and reduced him, until there was nothing left to come back. The massive tree at its center was in fact once the physical form of the nature god and vanquisher Roth. As he had committed himself to the healing of the land, body, mind, and divine soul, he became the root and sapling of this tree and grew as his essence acted as a great filter, helping to sift out the minute traces of dark and chaotic power that would either evade or return as the others tried to do their parts in the great mending. Once the swamp was once more a forest, he stayed immobile and unresponsive for ages, and many had thought he had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to the realms. Until one day, he walked out of the tree, whole, hearty, and healthy. He explained that he had needed some time to recover from the efforts of the mending, and was now only ready to return. He still spends a great deal of his time within the tree, but is now able to answer any calls for the defense of the realms or by his priests that need his wisdom. The grove that now bears his name is among the most fiercely protected locations in the realms by nearly all the major and minor players. It is universally seen as a place that should not be soiled by violence or the like. Those that have attempted to violate this have had the strange habit of ceasing to exist, and thus such events are fairly rare. Tended and watched by a god, visited by untold numbers every year, Roth's Grove serves as a reminder of the battles and wars fought to bring the realms where they are now. Honored sacrifice and the roar thereof with all the nobility and righteousness that it deserves. All made plain as the sun when one looks at the great tree of Roth. And with this brief look at one of the most awe-inspiring and holy sites within the realms at its end, I hope you now have a better understanding of why this is such a protected and often observed place. As always, my perceptive patrons, I want to thank you for your time, your attention, and your interest. It means the world. Thank you. Now, until you make your way back to the library for another entry, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. He took it all in. I figured he knew most of it already, and he was just as eager as I to leave the previous topic behind. So why am I here then? You're the one who called me. His voice had a soft tint of annoyance. I handed him an envelope. That has all the details and everything I know about where you should be going and what you should be looking out for. He took the envelope and opened it, quickly read the contents and looked at me while he stowed it away in a pocket in his vest. I wasn't aware you were now in the business of playing fixer. I am not a fixer. You know how little I enjoy these things. But when the revered call... A quick nod told me he now understood the situation. Well, that says it all. If you don't have anything else, I'll be off so you can have your peace here. No sarcasm, no wit, just an honest query. No, thank you, Setson. Please be safe. Crater's Drag is not a... Who am I kidding? You'll fit right in with the rascals and ne'er-do-wells of that place. I smiled wide, as Setson was a gambler and ne'er-do-well extraordinaire himself, but one with an eye on the greater balance of things, and thus often found himself having to act to maintain it. Tag, I keep telling you, we could clean out Old Dominion in less than a week if you weren't persona non grata on the grounds and everywhere within 50 miles. I laughed. He'd been making jokes about trying to clean out the old Baylor's place for as long as I had known him in the recent ages. We had only known each other in passing in the old days, but it seemed that the impossibility of the task is what drew him to the idea. There is that. Oh well, maybe next time. He chuckled as he walked off, leaving me to sit and begin to meditate. This ground was hallowed and blessed by the gods of men and elder, and I needed all the blessing and hallowed I could get, as it seemed that the prelude was now done, and the first act set to begin.